I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. This is your host, Eric. Today I'm joined by the James Geering. James, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I think most people say the James Geering, so I don't know how many people actually have that name around the world. So it's not that I'm special. I've just got a unique name.
But I think it's a good way to establish your alpha, position. If there are any up-and-comer James Geering, it's just like, no, back down.
Well, I know that there's actually a California fire chief called Jim Geering. So I know there's at least one more in uniform.
Yeah. Well, he's so casual. You're so formal, which is totally a joke, as people get the sense of you soon. But now we're just going to jump into it. I mean, you've been in the game. What do you mean by the game? The first responder game. You're basically like an action hero for those that don't know you, and they're going to hear a little bit about that. Like from being a stuntman to a firefighter. I mean, you're kind of doing like all the extreme. I mean, it's like every little boy's dream, right? To do these kind of archetypical, not real jobs. Like you made them real jobs, but then we're going to cover your journey moving out of first responder work and out of firefighter life, and very much still ingrained and probably arguably more so with your social and your podcast and what you're doing for first responder wellness. And so, yeah, I'm excited for this conversation. We've had conversations before, me coming on your show, so thank you for that, but also both of us hopping on the collective together. So shout out to the collective dudes, Sean and Chance. Always a good time.
I think that's what's so amazing about this medium now. Not only do you get to have these unfiltered conversations, where you just talk, and obviously you're not putting stuff out there that's just talking crap or whatever it is. You have this opportunity to have these conversations, and people listening, hopefully you go, wow, I never thought of it that way, or I didn't realize that resource was available to me. But then you go on the collective, and it's a completely different kind of dynamic. Again, now you've got 3 or 4 people bouncing things off each other. So I absolutely adore this medium because, it's the way that human beings are supposed to communicate. And what I love as a listener of podcasts is you can't interrupt. So these people have a chance to actually articulate all of their thoughts. And so then you go, oh, and actually I get it now, whereas a lot of us with the whole clickbait news these days is you get a 10-second soundbite and that's supposed to tell you everything about that person.
Yeah, that's all you get. You're either in or you're out.
Are you angry or you're not? Tell me now.
Yeah. Yeah, the long format is super appealing. I think maybe even as we battle these contending mediums, as you're talking about, right? Like the attention span is getting shorter and shorter. But if we talk about wellness, I think we're remiss if we don't talk about slowing down. This probably resonates. You're a doer, dude. So like I've even had stints where I feel like I gotta work out and I gotta like learn something on a podcast, and then like your brain gets tired and your body gets tired. And that's cool at times, but also I've been challenging myself just to slow down and just be in the space. Sometimes that's literally just soaking in one thing. Maybe that's not listening to anything, no music, no podcast, which is also rewarding in a different sense.
I'm literally going through that right now as I get to the end of the second book, and I'm just going through and editing now to send to my editor for the first draft. It was just a case of, like you said, it's more attention span. It's more just energy in general. It's not tiring sitting down, writing or going over what you've written, but it requires so much energy as far as your focus. And so I haven't done any strength and conditioning for a few weeks now. I even paused the one that I coach. Yeah, and I do jiu-jitsu every week, but even this week I'm not doing it because I'm almost done with this book. So I'm just kind of doubling down now. But I think it's that whack-a-mole. I know when I started CrossFit, for example, you like, I've got to get better at gymnastics and Olympic lifting and, all these other things. And then you realize you can't do them all. Either you focus on one and you go all in, or you just go, okay, I'm just going to chip away at all of them, but I'm not going to be able to go full bore on every single element of it. And so I think understanding that kind of whack-a-mole dynamic, that it's okay to just gate down to 1 day a week for jiu-jitsu while you focus on helping your kid get through the grades because they're being threatened to be held back at school or whatever, whatever is a true priority that takes over, you're not going to suddenly end up, dying of heart disease if you skip a few workouts to focus on something that's more important.
Yeah. I was working with a small group coaching recently, and that was one of the kind of wrap up session prompts, right? And feedback was, one of the dudes was like, yeah, this is all awesome. I got so much information, but I don't even kind of know what to focus on, right? There's so much. And I'm like, well, that was kind of the point, was just to give you, the fire hose, pun intended, talking to you, but just get the deluge of information. And then that's why you have notes. That's why we, provided the feedback or the homework where you write down all of your intentions so you can revisit them. Like, you're not supposed to just dial up everything every night, and you can't go full bore. And I think that that's really important for people like yourself to recognize that and acknowledge that publicly for others, because that is the tricky part of social media and looking at celebrities. And it seems that they got it so easy and they have it all put together all the time. But really, as I live more life, it's like you have to toggle some things up at times, whether that's career or whether that's family. You're talking about parenting, and then you got to toggle things back down, right? And so life and things are meant to go in ebbs and waves, and we can't all just go full bore all the time. It's not sustainable, and you truly can't pay attention or intention to all these things. Even talking to Lisa Jaster, one of the first U.S. Rangers, who's a woman, she came on the podcast, and I met her through the collective. So another shout out for the collective. But when we were talking about juggling, we kind of reached the comparison of, it's not necessarily like juggling like 12 to 15 balls and adding more and more. It's like, no, you set some down and then you juggle a few, right? You feel what you can maintain. And if you want to pick up those other balls, maybe you put the other ones down or throw them in your pocket for a cool trick. So, I think that's one thing that makes it tricky with social media, is the comparingness of what that brings out.
I just had a guest, he spent like a year in FDNY, and then he was in psychology before and he went back into it after. But I just shared a clip of one of the things that he said, and he talked about, I think it was inspirational or motivational junkies. He said, they consume all the information. They've got the YouTube videos that they play every morning. They go to the seminars. They read every book that every motivationally person has written. And he said, but then they don't really do much with it. And I think the problem is they're overwhelmed. And I think that, we've all done this. We've all bought books that sit on our bookshelf and we haven't read them yet. You know what I mean? So conversely, he was saying you have, I forget the term he used, but the effective, human who really just kind of finds one book that they read and they actually go through it and they actually enact the things that it's talking about. And I was like, that's very much our, population at the moment. We are so overwhelmed with information as it is that sometimes, you can't see the wood for the trees. And just taking a step back and going, I resonate with this person, this author. I'm going to find, their course or their book or their exercise routine, and I'm just going to do that. I'm not going to worry about also being an Olympic gymnast and strongman champion and be able to do the splits between two chairs. I'm just going to work on this one thing. And I think that was very, very profound. I mean, it's just back to basics, find someone who really resonates with you and then shut off the white noise of the other quote unquote influences of the world.
Yeah, it becomes paralysis by analysis. It becomes competing ideologies. How do I get to this goal, whether it's fitness or whether it's, intellect or what have you? Yeah, you're going to have this school of thought, and then you're going to have 5 that are completely contradictory, right? And like, the irony is, if you followed one of them, you'd probably do pretty good. And then if you follow the other one, you'd probably do similarly effective because you were pretty intentional, right? So all just sticking to like a plan rather than trying to concoct your super plan.
I think finding common denominators, and you probably found this now with the number of conversations you've had, there are some glaring truths that come out of almost 1,000 interviews. And the big thing, I had a guy, James Wilkes, on a long time ago, and he was behind I think it was the Game Changers, the vegan documentary, and he was a UFC fighter.
That's right.
Great conversation with him. And actually, it's funny because he asked me to hold on to it because he was about to go on Joe Rogan, because Joe and then I think Chris Kresser had been tearing apart the movie. And so he was going on to kind of defend himself.
Yeah.
And it was so sad because they were going back and forth of why they disagreed with their differences. And the part they were missing, which is what I talked to James about, is if you look at carnivore, if you look at, keto, if you look at paleo, if you look at veganism, the common denominator is they're taking the shitty food out of their diet. So you're not having the pastas and the cereals and the refined breads. That's the real secret sauce. So if you lean towards carnivore, knock yourself out. If you're more plant-based, go for it. But understand that if you are removing, as they say, the middle of the store, the processed food from your diet, whatever direction you change to lean in, that is the truth. That is really what's going to make an impact on your gut health and your overall health.
Yeah, no, that's so well put, because these are still very prevalent fads or ideologies. And yeah, some people are doing fantastically on keto or like a 90% keto. And the ones that are generally just eating real food, right? They're just eating lots of veggies, like green veggies, and some healthy fats, some meat, eggs, right? And then the people that are not are essentially starving because they don't have nutrition, and they're just pounding down sugar bomb, or I guess sugar alcohol bombs, right? These like fat bombs that are processed. They're basically candy without the actual sugar, but your body doesn't know the difference, right? So are you still spiking your insulin, all these things? But yeah, they're just at a loss, and they're frustrated, and it sucks because that is big food industry. The people that are not thriving on a vegan diet are crushing Beyond Burgers, right? But like, they could just do better having some actual food, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's the thing. You can be a vegan or vegetarian and still eat like shit. And you can
Absolutely.
be a carnivore. I mean, this is the one thing. One of my guests is on a carnivore diet, a guest I had a while ago, and every time he posts, he's an In-N-Out burger, but they don't have the bun. And I'm like, I get the concept, but you're still all that, saturated fats and these oils that we are starting to realize now are really not good for us, because they're refined in a way that the body doesn't recognize, et cetera, et cetera. So, is the philosophy that you've chosen close to how we would have eaten 100 years ago? I think that's the ultimate question.
Yeah, and I think that that's a key point, right? Everybody's different. Just your own genealogy, your own ethnicity breakdown. Like, what would your ancestors be eating? People that are mixed race, they might have a different kind of puzzle to work with. But yeah, like look at your blood work, so you have a legitimate place to start. But certainly, yeah, it is case dependent, but that is the common theme. And that's a lot of why I love your content. You have these critical conversations. But you look at your Instagram, and I feel like it's very intentionally positive in a swirl of so much negativity and polarization and all that, right? But even in the topics when you explore some more potentially politically driven conversations, you're very mindful. And I feel like there's this intentional tone to say, hey, like, this is where I'm coming from. And it's not disparaging, but it's just saying some some real truth and some things that some people need to hear that they're not able to hear it in a traditional media outlet for potentially obvious, maybe not so obvious reasons. To most, it should be pretty obvious.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I truly believe, and I was just talking to Tulsi Gabbard about this the other day. I was
listening to that. That was good.
It was a great conversation. It took me about 3 years to get her on, but we got there.
She's sharp. Yeah, she's a good listen.
Yeah, but I would argue she's in the middle. She's that person who represents most of us, whether you lean a little left or a little right, and again, that is tarring with the same brush. Most people lean a little left this way, a little right that way, depending on the topic and what affects them in their own communities. But all I try and do in the social media is stand in the middle and try and gather people back, because as we know, the more angered you are, the less you can critically think. So if you bring people back to neutral, they can go back and lean, that way after, but you bring them back and say, look, the most basal things. Do you want food? Do you want your children to have a good education? Do you want them to be safe in their schools? I mean, all these things where it doesn't matter if you're pro-gun, anti-gun, whatever the tug of war is for that particular topic. The middle part, let's take COVID. Do you want your family to die? No. Okay. Well, then, you can explore vaccines, but you can also look at fitness, nutrition, all these other things too. So if you're ignoring the fitness, nutrition, and then going just for the vaccine, you're missing, you've strayed way away from the middle. If you're all Chinese conspiracy and no ownership of your wellness, you've strayed the other way. You know what I mean? So the truth is always in the middle, in my opinion.
Yeah, that was so tough. I was recently I talked to some folks on podcasts recently, but also talked to some people in my personal circles and just kind of revisiting what that was like, through all of COVID. And it was pretty jarring, pretty terrifying in a lot of ways, especially early on, right? And it became so divisive. And I hope that, I talk about optimism a lot, and people have labeled me as an optimist. And I don't think it's not by accident. Like, it's an intentional, I suppose, drive to try to stay more positive, like err on that side, because it's so easy to slip hard. Because I've been there too, where it's all cynicism and it's everything's effed up and this and that. But okay, like I like to think that there's a silver lining. There, sometimes it's faint. Certainly we lost a lot of people and a lot of lost relationships, lost livelihoods. It's really terrible. But I like to think that out of this, the majority of people had some lessons, maybe some hard lessons, but I hope and try to believe that there is some recognition of how we need to perceive information, how we need to regard each other. We all got to remember we're human, we're one. We are the only community we have, right? So let's not flip on each other and get all nuts. But yeah, that was a different time, and hopefully we don't revisit something like that in the same way.
Well, we will, unless we actually have the humility to learn from what Mother Nature was telling us. You know what I mean? And you talk about optimism. I consider myself an angry optimist because I know things are going to get better, but that sometimes, results in you having to punch someone in the face metaphorically to stop them acting so ridiculously that they're stopping us moving in the right direction. So you can be an altruist and optimist without, rolling over and just accepting everything. So, but I think the big thing with the pandemic that was so disgusting is that the truth was, as Winston Churchill said, you can measure the greatness of a nation by the health of its people. And we have a nation that is 70% obese or overweight. We consume 75% of the world's opioids. We have 20% of the world's incarcerated population, and we only make up 4% of the world's population. So there are so many areas that we need to improve. And we're going back to the obesity thing. What we should have seen with good leadership is that start to drop again, as we get healthier, because we learned this lesson, like, wow, this one tiny, microorganism was slaying our, weak and infirm. And so we need to improve the health. But nothing was done. The same shitty food is being served in our schools. PE programs are still cut. Parks in urban areas are still kind of concrete jungles, and there's no pedestrianized areas in downtowns. Local farmers are not getting subsidies now because of the massive bottleneck that we had. That's what should have happened, and it didn't. So I think that if we didn't learn it then we need to collectively start demanding it now. Otherwise, another virus, let's call him Steve, will flow through the world, and he'll just kill a bunch more people.
As you're discussing this, I'm thinking, why wasn't there a push for exercise? Well, there's no money in exercise. There's no money in weight loss. But then I was like, wait, there is a lot of money in weight loss. It's called the fitness industry, and it's this flavor, that flavor. What's the common quit rate of people after they try a new thing? And I wonder, there's certainly money in it.
That's an interesting comparison, actually. And ironically, I just interviewed Johan Hari, who wrote a book called The Magic Pill, which is just about that. And he's done some amazing books. There's one book, Chasing the Scream, on addiction. Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. So, and we talked about that, the pros and the cons. And, that's just it. If we're going to say that everyone is a murderer if they don't take this particular, syringe, then why could we not put the same aggression towards obesity? Now, the answer is because that's not fair. Exactly. And it wasn't with the vaccine, the way that first responders and military and medical personnel were terminated because they didn't take that vaccine. That's where we got, which is horrendous. But the answer goes back to compassionately creating an environment that naturally encourages people to be healthier. If you take out shitty food and put real food, just like they used to in schools back in the day, and remove all the soda machines and everything, slowly through osmosis, you will create healthier children. If you look at the PE program they had in California in the 60s, the Motivation Factor covered that, an amazing documentary. The whole school had to do PE So you had your uber stud athletes that were then already conditioned for baseball, for basketball, for football. But even the clarinet player and the math geek, and I mean that compassionately, were also in great shape and had been set up for success to have a healthy, long life. But we are setting our children up for nothing but illness and disease and an early death. And that is disgusting.
Yeah, that's tough. And I remember having mandatory physical education, and I was the math geek, and I was the violin player actually in middle school. But yeah, like I didn't love it. Like I loved playing, right? Like I loved running around, tag, and like, playing dodgeball, things like that. I wasn't coordinated, as all my closest friends know. Like they'll make a lot of fun of me as far as like my hand-eye coordination, better than it was as a kid. So that's my positive spin. But yeah, like I recognize, and I think that a lot of people recognize, when they take health into their own hands and in a more dedicated way, you just build momentum, and it literally makes every other part of your life better. It makes you more confident in everything you're doing. It's not just the flash, but a little bit. Like it is great to be able to go to the hardware store and pick up, 10 bags of topsoil and not have to strain yourself, not have to worry like, oh, I'm going to feel this tomorrow. No, it's just a day. It's like a warm up. That's fantastic, right? Like I just think that there's this notion where if you're a parent or just if you're a member of the community, to have the ability to just handle life, like what life throws at you. And you might not be a parent, and it might be some kid running to the street in your neighborhood while you're getting the mail, and you can either grab that kid or run out in front and flag that car or what have you. Like that's something that a lot of America, to your point, can't do. And that's not a good place to be, right? That's not a good place to be. And we're not even talking about the social ills and evils that are out there. I mean, you know just as much, being a retired firefighter, the things that you've responded to alongside police as our brothers and sisters out there. Like there are a lot of terrible people that do terrible things, but just if we had a populace that was a little bit more aware and a little bit more able, like just took a little bit more ownership, like that could be very different in what that looks like.
Well, even with that PE program, what they saw was not only stronger, healthier kids, but their grades went up and the bullying went down, because these kids had to do these PE sessions as a group, and obviously they team them up, similar ability, but then it fostered teamwork as well, leadership and shared suffering, just like we have in police academies and fire academies and boot camps around the world. So it's not just the physical side; it's the psychological side. And if you look at Finland's education system, which is ranked basically number one most of the time in the world, they have a huge amount of play. They are outside a lot, and their days are shorter. So this, less is more that we're seeing seems to really start to finally take some traction, whether it's less, full contact sparring in an MMA gym, or less, time in the gym strength and conditioning because we've overtrained so much, or whether it's the work week. A lot of the corporate leaders now have realized that a 4-day work week is just as productive as a 5, because all you do is you actually become more efficient at work, and then you get an extra day to rest. So now you're fired up on the Monday again. So, it's so much more than just, six pack and, all the superficial things that our generations were raised on with the films. It's the holistic impact of exercise and time outside on the human being.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well said. Maybe that's the perfect transition. We're going to go out of order. I mean, this was meant to be pretty organic flow, but that is one thing I want to ask you about, from being an industry professional for so many years, and even more so having the awareness and the work where you're interacting and interviewing and diving in to look at what the industry is doing, first responder work, EMTs, firefighters, police departments. And I know you've talked about this, but for the audience here, like what are some of the biggest challenges facing first responders with regard to health? Like this is how the schedules are, like the brass tacks of how the organization's working. Like what are the challenges, the biggest issues that you see, and then we can gravitate into what better options there are that are viable?
I think the biggest mistake we make in any conversation is by choosing just one thing. Oh, it's this. So for example, school violence. Oh, it's guns. Oh, no, it's not guns. Yes, it is guns. No, it's not guns. And you're missing the other 20 pieces of the puzzle that creates psychosis in a young child at that moment. So when it comes to wellness and performance in the first responder professions, it's the environment and it's the individual. So what'll happen is they'll tell us, and even with the sleep conversation, well, you just need to sleep better when you're off duty, rather than, well, why are we working you the way that we're working you in the first place? But let's go back to the front door. So I was very fortunate enough to have kind of a gypsy career in the fire service. So I worked 4 fire departments, the West Coast and the East Coast. So I got a really unique perspective, arguably one of the best fire departments in the country, Anaheim, and then one of the worst, who I won't name, which is my last one. So, really, really kind of nuanced perspective of what works, what doesn't. And then what's the impact of great candidates at the front door, and then what's the impact of poor candidates at the front door 10, 20 years later. So to me, the very first thing is fitness standards. Strong fitness standards. So Anaheim, for example, the first year, and it wasn't like we did the BIDL, which is the firefighter test, and we have the CPAT in most of the country. Those should not be hard for a candidate. If you're finding those hard, you got a shitload of work to do, because you shouldn't be scraping the very edge of that time. You should be crushing it. Same as if you're testing for Green Berets or SEALs or something else. So, but then as Anaheim went through their first year of probation, the work that we had to do, from hose to roof operations to extrication, it was intense, and we had to give classes and learn building construction. And the first year, you literally were fearing for your job every single day. You know what I mean? Which is brilliant. So by the time you get to the end of that year, they forged a culture of performance. And so there were no actual fitness standards in Anaheim, but Anaheim, when I was there, was a very fit department, as was a lot of actually Southern California, to be fair. So I think there was that culture. So arguably, if you foster that culture, you don't need fitness standards. But for a lot of the country, we need fitness standards, because if we don't have that culture, we've got to at least hold the bar high. So now you're in the profession. Somewhere. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So now we're in the profession. A lot of, not only admin, but a lot of unions oppose fitness standards, which I think is fucking disgusting. But you're asking people who go from a dead sleep to sliding down 2-story pole, getting into the back of a truck, driving lights and sirens to a fire, now pulling off all the equipment, throwing a ladder, making entry into a burning building, doing a search, possibly finding someone, muscling them down the ladder. Then, depending on staffing, you might have to doff your gear and start doing cardiac arrest algorithm, and drug calculations in your mind at 3 a.m. So if you're telling me that profession doesn't need to have a fitness standard, but the ocean lifeguards do, then it's disgusting. I don't know how we got here. I joined the fire service way late from its history, but that is one of the biggest disservices that we've done. And when I talk to the special operations community and the lifeguarding community, they're just baffled. Like, how can you not have a standard? Lives literally depend on you.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did we get here? That might be hard to assess, like even from a historian perspective. But we can surmise that, because not only like how did we get here, but where are we going? Where are we tracking? And I know that you comment about this. I try to post about this when I see it, because it's sadly not uncommon, but another, okay, so I just posted today. This is a springtime recording. Maybe this will be in summer. But regardless, like 2023, police hiring got way better than prior years. Like a lot of people feel that. A lot of people share that. Cool. The work's not done. But even when this upward trend is happening, where we should be happy and building momentum off of that, because there's a lot of work to do, you still see these posts and articles about reduction of fitness standards, or pausing fitness standard, or removing this other thing, this other requirement on an already low standard that is lower ranks, right? So how do we get here? And I love how you talked about, in response to how do we make the job, I suppose we're kind of saying like, hey, what are some of the hurdles and challenges of the job? And you're saying like, we need to require more to come in. Whereas a lot of people recognize, hold on, James, like we're having issues with hiring, but we can't lower the bar. We're just going to kick the can farther down the hill, and it's just going to fester into a worse situation literally a couple of years later. And then we're going to be having, sadly, this increasing magnitude of conversation of like, hey, where do we go with first responder fitness and wellness? Because we are literally setting ourselves up for a worse failure.
So an interesting confusing statistic is that we are filling those vacancies. And I guess someone I had on the show recently said a friend of theirs said, because they were talking about, the struggles they had in the first responder, they're like, well, there's an academy full of firefighters just waiting to take your spot. And I disagree. Here's the difference. You can fill a spot with a human being, with a body. But the difference is, when I tested for Anaheim in 04, 05, I tested against 1,000, this is the written test, so they've already filtered out a bunch, 1,000 certified firefighters that were either EMTs or paramedics as well. Nearly all of them had experience with CDF, with ambulance operators. They were explorers. I mean, these are fat resumes, 1,000 of these dudes and women. And so when they hired, I think there was 30 of us in total they hired. So you think about percentages, not saying that I'm some great firefighter, but obviously there was something about, my resume, and I lateraled. So it wasn't a lateral position, but I'd already worked as a firefighter in the Miami area. So I think that was what gave me a little edge. And the fact that I was flying 2,500 miles to test, I'm sure that they saw there was some dedication there.
Yeah.
But so now you think about the percentages, you get to take the top X% of all those people that have tested for you. So then what I saw with my own eyes in Anaheim was then they become great firefighters, great engineers, great captains, great battalion chiefs, great chiefs, et cetera, et cetera. Not all of them. There's always, the ones that fall through the net, but most. Now, look at where I live now, Marion County. They are basically scooping up anyone they can find. And their standards are their training is good, and they do the CPAT, so credit where credit's due. But the CPAT, like I said, you can train to get the absolute bare minimum, scrape through, you get a checkbox, and off you go. But if you have 100 people test and they hire 100 people, you're getting that top, same cream of the crop, but then you're getting everyone else all the way to the shitbags at the bottom. So now, fast forward, recruitment's getting better, but it's not. You're just hiring people. Doesn't mean that you're hiring the right people. Mm-hmm. And how is that going to factor into the troubles that we're seeing in law enforcement with mistakes being made when you've got candidates that have no business wearing the uniform making it through now?
Yeah. And to your point, you kind of brought it up, if you have someone that is not fit, and, we're talking about kids, like there's data behind this, but healthy bodies, healthy minds, right? Your brain is part of your body. Your brain is shuttling oxygen, or your body is shuttling nutrients and oxygen to your brain, helping it work, helping it learn, helping it acquire necessary information. And we all know, those in the industries know that when you're of well body, you're of a sharp mind, right? So you can make these split second decisions. And so that's very much in tune with that. And then also there's the correlation of people that don't take ownership to develop themselves as a professional, right? This is a profession. It's not just a job, not just a vocation, where you do got to take some time in your off time, right? So like, I love these notions. I'm frequently a fan of working out on duty, giving people the resources, the gyms. Like, if we can think about what kind of information we could teach them so they can learn about nutrition, that's awesome. But it's not an obligation of the employer. Like, that's fantastic. I love where it's going. I'm very much a fan. But like, we need to own that, right? And there are plenty of cops, firefighters, military personnel out there that are taking a lot of their own time, a lot of their own money to invest in making themselves better and healthier so that they can perform on the day, as we say. But it's all part of that. And you're absolutely right. Like, when we lower the bar, we have these people that, maybe they're not even the people that are willing to put in the few weeks or couple months, depending on where you're at, to get to the point where you can do 20, 25 push-ups. Like, if you don't have that amount of resolve, this is not shaming. This is just saying, hey, gut check. Like, if you don't have that amount of resolve to take ownership of yourself and your own life, like, how can any layperson expect you to show up on this critical day where bullets are flying and you got to save a kid, right? Or you got to save your buddy and you got to drag him 200 yards behind cover. Maybe you take a round, maybe you don't. Like, how can we expect that? It's not even reasonable to surmise that. And, not just to throw this out there, but as we're talking about all this, like, there are different times because, yeah, we might be filling vacancies and seats, but for how long, right? Because to your point, we're hiring the wrong people. And if they weren't really invested to do those 20 push-ups, we already know it's trending. Like, people are looking at this like it's a job for a bit, right? It's not a lifelong career. It's not a 10, 20, 30-year thing. It might be a 2 to 4 year thing until the next thing. And so we got to contend with that. But if we don't have people invested, then it's going to be even more of a revolving door, sometimes by their choice, sometimes by ours.
I think with the recruitment question, because I get this a lot when I talk about the firefighter work week. So the average American firefighter works 24 hours straight, then a 48-hour period off. Some might have what they call Kelly days. Every 3 or 6 weeks, they get an extra 24 off. But that 24, 48 is 56 hours a week. And now you add in the recruitment crisis, which I was forced most of my career. So this is ongoing, this kind of mismanagement. But now you're creating an 80-hour work week for that firefighter. So you think about that. That's 2 civilian work weeks together in a week. And yet we still believe our own lies and walk around saying we have the greatest schedule in the world, and we don't. It's absolute smoke and mirrors. 3 days crammed together as a 24-hour shift, not one. So we work 3 days on, 1 day off, or 30 days a month. Not so impressive when you put it down that way. So what has happened in 2024 is, in the fire service, people are seeing the detrimental, effects of the way that they're worked. The cancers, the heart disease, the overdose, the suicides, all the things. The marriage problems, the infertility. It goes on and on and on. And so now people are looking and going, that doesn't sound so good. When I came on, it was all ladder 49 and rah, rah, rah. And off we went. So, and now in law enforcement, obviously the last few years, as you and I spoke about before, has really reframed the support from your department. Are you going to get that? Are you going to do everything right and then have your legs cut from under you? That doesn't sound good. I don't know if I want to do that. People seem to hate cops these days, and they don't. This is the thing. The media tells us that the people hate cops the same way as the media told us that we all hated Asians when COVID came out. I'm married to one. She's awesome. So stop fucking projecting and telling everyone how we're supposed to feel. So it's fixing that environment, though. That is how you change recruitment. You if you have a department that takes their fitness seriously, because I disagree slightly with what you said, just simply because on our days off, absolutely, we should continue to own our own fitness, be diligent with our sleep, etc. But the military has gyms, the NFL, the NBA, they all have gyms, and it should be no different. So we should have access to that training. And a firefighter or a cop shouldn't have to take vacation days and use their own money to do a tactical medicine course or, whatever it is. And I've had to pay my whole life for and then the skills are only useful in the fire service. I can't go and stand on the side of the freeway with the jaws of life, offering $100 extrications. There's no way of me making money with my skills except as a firefighter. So this is what's crazy. But when it comes back to the fitness standards, though, and the health, the other side of that two-sided conversation is the environment. And if we're working our responders to death, and we've got cops, with an elevated, unnecessary level of stress because they're not getting support from their department, and they're overworked and they're stuck in a freaking patrol car for 10, 12 hours at a time, that, and then the split shifts, the days and nights, that is woefully detrimental to the endocrine system. So then that breaks down the individual, making it harder to retain lean mass and destroying our testosterone and certainly messing with our mental health, hormonal balances. So we got to have both conversations. Yes, the candidate should be prepared, and if they don't make it as a cop or a firefighter, that's fine. There's accountants and all kinds of other things that you can go do. But I'm not going to be very happy if my kid died because you tapped out 10 stories up because your fat ass couldn't make it. So I have zero tolerance for lack of fitness in our profession. But if we're not addressing the elements that work against our responders being prepared, that is the other side of the conversation. And I think that we should have gyms, and we should, have an environment where we really focus on rest and recovery so that you guys can not only rest your bodies, but also your minds and process the trauma that we see on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I'll walk that back. And I've posted on numerous times and said a lot of things where we should have time to work out on duty. We should have gyms. There are policies sometimes that prohibit that, right? There's some that just don't really address it. And then there's ones that prohibit, like you will not work out on duty, which is just asinine. I think in an ideal world, you have shorter shifts and you have it built in where in your day-to-day you can do that. But if a cop's working 12 to 16 hours, is that even reasonable, right? Like how much time plus commuting are you actually going to be able to work out? You'll probably be able to do something, but barely. And then to the neglect of something else. Are you going to prep your meal? Are you going to spend time with your family? Who knows, right? and firefighters, absolutely, like, yeah, that doesn't even make sense, right? So, that when you're there all day, like that should be part of your day, right? That should be budgeted in. And then I know that it depends on the department, it depends on the pace, but firefighters, are you actually sleeping at night, or are you getting up 3 or 4 times, right? That's arguably even worse. It might even feel worse than just staying up, pulling an all-nighter, which we know that how corrosive to the body that is. And I think for the first time ever, you have firefighters that are considering career change to something else to include law enforcement, which is just boggling, right? There's some veteran firefighters that see those trends with, they're healthy guys, but they look at the trends for cancer in their friends and these terrible diagnoses, and I'm like, man, do I want that? Like, I got 10 years left. Do I want to face that, or do I want to punch out and spend my nights at home? I mean, that's a real conversation. And whereas I think that we are kind of narrow-minded and maybe tunnel vision to a lot of these trends, right? You talked about this quote unquote great schedule where you only work X days a month. Well, you can only afford to work that many days a month because you're so burned out and you need all the time to recuperate. But is that even ideal? Like, I talked to a host of younger firefighters that are like, I don't even know how this schedule is awesome. Like, I feel awful, halfway through my quote unquote work week. And then my second day off are kind of garbage because they're just trying to recover. And I get it. Like, that's a real thing. Same thing. You talk about police, you talk about unions, right? Like, unions are so focused oftentimes about protecting quote unquote jobs that they're losing sight of like protecting the people, right? And if you're going to fight an administration that's trying to get some standards in for the betterment of the people and the actual community that we're trying to serve, I mean, man, like we've really gotten out of sorts on like what our real purpose and intention should be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think especially with, the fire union, for example, I'm talking about the national now, there's some very good unions, department specific, but it's 2024 and we don't even have a work week standard. Now, the answer to the conundrum of the fire service is you put another 24, you add another shift, which is when people go, oh, we can't even hire anyone now. I'm like, well, if you show the population that you actually give a shit about your fire department, you will have a line around the corner of your fire department again. So the 24/72, which is still a 42-hour work week. It's almost to the civilian one, but not quite. It's still a couple hours higher.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
That's what, the unicorn with rainbows come out of his ass. Schedule is through people's minds. It's like the people that get up at 3 to save your child, you're fine with them being worked to death. But God forbid the barista works more than 40 hours. You know what I mean? It's just pure insanity. So for me, the proactive way of fixing all the things, from the fitness and the camaraderie and the diligence and reducing the lawsuits because we're so tired, we make mistakes and push the wrong drugs and crash into someone on an intersection, is you actually invest in your people. So that proactive element is essential, but the only barrier to it, because there's a financial savings, there's no downside to it at all, other than a leader has to actually have the courage and step up and advocate for their people and demand that change happens and educate the cities and counties on why it would be a good idea. That is where I see we fail massively. And even here in Marion, we just had a research study done by some local individuals that prove that this was the case. And I've seen nothing happen yet here. So this is it. There's people that wear the bugles on their shirts and beat their chest about being the chief or the union president or whatever it is. Well, it's time for you to step the fuck up and actually do what you pay for. Yeah.
Are you seeing any improvement with that? Because in police, I know it's varied, right? Some unions would traditionally say like, no, why would we ever allow an administration to limit how much our guys work, because that's limiting earning potential. It's like, yes, there's a reasonable balance, but like for a firefighter, like, do you really want someone working in a busy department 72 hours in a row? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And I think that as a union and just someone with conviction and integrity, you got to be like, hey, I see this middle ground, and that is reasonable to put a cap on it. That is reasonable to put an hour cap on how much our guys can work, because they need to rest for their own health and longevity. Like, it seems to make sense.
That would literally be like a hygienist demanding that the dentist opens for another day so they can make more money. Like, no, this is the work week. This is it.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing with the overtime is it's only there because if California has an earthquake, if Florida has a hurricane, we give our families a kiss and we go back into the danger when everyone else is running from it. I don't mean that to act like we're heroes. It's just that's the above and beyond part that we do. That's when the overtime is supposed to be there. Or, God forbid, you have some horrendous fatal fire and you lose 8 of your people. Now you all step up and you fill those spots, rightly so. But with the money thing, this is the problem. Unions have chased money for years and years and years, and to the point where it's so self-serving that they will oppose wellness initiatives because they want to make more overtime. What I would say as a counter to that, firstly, anyone who said, because I've had chiefs say that, if we give them more time off, they'll just work more. Well, who the fuck are you to dictate someone on their days off? What an arrogant piece of shit if that's the way you think. That being said, though, let me leave my profanity there. If you then have more time to be with your family, there's a much higher chance that then you're going to start finding something else that you also like to do on the side. So, for example, you're such a good violinist that you actually start working with an orchestra and you play on the side, or you're a carpenter or a painter or whatever it is. But the beautiful thing is you will still go to bed in your own home with your family each night. I don't care if you landscape for 10 hours. You're tired, you go home, you have dinner with your loved ones, and then you go to bed. If you take overtime in a police station or a fire station, you are not with your loved ones. You are doing yet another sleepless night in a high-stress environment, which is completely detrimental. The other huge plus of being forced to make extra money if you need it, and I get it, a lot of departments are not well paid. I totally understand that. But being, choosing or having to earn money on the side is if you then enter another profession and have another tribe and maybe even become an entrepreneur and create your own business, when it is time to transition out, whether it's a full retirement or you tore an Achilles or whatever it is, you have that thing now to transition to. And the loss of purpose is the biggest thing that's crushing to our people. But if you've already built something that you also love doing, that makes that transition a lot more, a lot easier. And you've got that second guarantee of income, because God forbid, some crazy George Floyd thing happens again and they end up terminating the entire police force. Well, that wasn't all your eggs in one basket. You have this other thing to lean into. So that would be my answer is again, drop your arrogance, stop being so ridiculous, and think about how you can actually have that second passion that you've always dreamed of. Because we love law enforcement, we love fire, but it's not the only thing in the world. And I'm sure there's something else that you would also love to try.
Yeah, absolutely. And, those are real conversations that I had with my crew in 2020. And it was saying like, hey, like in my roll call, it's like, hey, I'm going to talk to you guys individually. And this is not to put pressure on, but this is to have a healthy conversation. Like, what would you do if you couldn't do this job? Or if tomorrow your family, it's literally like your wife and your kids or your husband, right? Like just saying like, honey, like we don't want this for you. We don't want this for us. Like, and just to entertain either that or legitimately, yeah, you tear an Achilles on your way to the mailbox, right? You're doing wind sprints or something and you just, you bust out. Like, what if this job is not for you? And like, what are you going to do? And there were some really meaningful conversations. Some people explored some old ideas and something that they started getting their degree back in the day. And maybe they'd pick up this or they'd go back to trade school because they like to weld as a hobby and they'd really make some time to do that. I'm like, all right, cool. Like, do you think it sounds reasonable to like pick up the welding torch like twice this month? And they're like, oh yeah, easy. I'm like, cool. Then you're on track, right? You can start looking at some YouTube, try a new thing. And I truly think that the more we just focus on being more well-rounded, healthy individuals, we're going to show up better as healthy first responders, right? So that's a lot of my thing is just how can we get better at just being people, being humans, and we're going to show up better at work. There is a lot that you can do to become a better firefighter with technical skills or a police officer with tactics or investigative skills, but also just being a more patient parent, being a nicer neighbor makes you so much better at being a first responder. And I wish I knew that at a younger age, but then again, things happen for a reason. I was probably curt and abrasive and egotistical in some ways, as a lot of young men are. because it helped me learn these lessons even harder and even deeper at a later point. But yeah, I love your response there, man, because I fully agree. We know that the overtime trap does not make people better individuals. It does not even set up people financially better. They usually end up just spending more and then spending more to make up for the time they're away, right? Like buying your affection. We know that thing. And a lot of us have experienced that as kids or what have you, right? When the parents weren't around enough. That's really what your family wants. They just want you to be around and present.
I mean, I think it all boils down to what is your currency. And if you look at what's most important to you, it's not going to have a president's face on it. It's your children. It's your loved one. So the moment that you kind of lose this, lose the grasp of the currency that's most important is when you start sliding down. And I agree completely. You're on a treadmill then. Doesn't matter. I mean, in Anaheim, I was there right before the crash, and they were trying to kind of, bully me into getting into the housing market. And I came from Florida, and I'm like, dude, you're insane.
Yeah, what are you playing?
Yeah, 800 square foot house for like $500,000. Like, have you lost your fucking mind? And they had Winnebagos and jet skis and dirt bikes and, you name it. And sadly, a few years later, I think most of them had none of that. It was all taken back. But fast, go back to the 1980s when the firefighters would have been more than happy they had a Camaro, or, you know what I mean? So it is such a slippery slope, because no matter how much you have, the television will always tell you don't have enough. I mean, how many dudes drive around in massive trucks that never haul a thing? But the dude with the cowboy voice told him that's what a man drives. You know what I mean? So we're constantly duped into this, consumerism, and everything needs to be bigger and better. And it's just, it's a complete facade. And if you reverse engineer, what do I actually need? It's not very much. I went around the world a few years ago as a young man, or a lot of years ago as a young man, with a backpack and a guitar. That was it for a year. And that was all I needed. You know what I mean? It really helped reframe what we need versus what we want.
Did you feel rich back then, thinking back to those days?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this. I got hired in Japan as a stuntman, and the Japanese rooms are tiny, but it was really well engineered, but it was just enough space for I guess it would be a double bed, maybe even smaller than a double bed. There was a couch. The bathroom was like a wet room, so the toilet was also right next to the shower. And then there was like one hob, gas hob, and then a microwave, and then a washer dryer that were on top of each other. So, I mean, square foot wise, basically almost smaller than most American hotel rooms. But that seemed like a mansion after living in hostels and traveling the world that way. So, yeah, I mean, it reframed it, and obviously as you go on now, if you look at where I live now, it's a beautiful big home, and I don't have anything in storage, and my garage isn't chock full of stuff, but probably 70% of what I got I could live without easily. So I think that's the other part. It's, you always say, I need to earn more. Well, look at it the other way. Like, are you living beyond your means? Is your house just overly sized? Would you be equally as happy in a smaller home that costs less to cool, and is in a great neighborhood with, parks and schools for your kids, but you're not impressing the Joneses anymore, So that's the other side, is trying to break the shackles of American consumerism.
Yeah, no, that's such a thing. What a big note to wrap on, is that, like, what do we really need and what are the important things? And I suppose I had the benefit of interacting with a lot of people coming into the job. And in these times, post 2020, when some people were walking away and some people dug in and they stayed, and other people were coming in after a little of the dust settled, but to say, hey, like, I see what's going on in the world and I don't like it and I want to be part of the solution. And some of these people are walking away from big tech jobs, right? And so the pay cut is real, right? And it's like, you talk about how much you can earn at a hiring workshop, and some young folks, their eyes are getting big. And then other people are like, it's a big cut and they ought to make it work for their family. But some of the people that made the jump, like, how fulfilled they feel, how purposeful they feel. And there's like really truly no price for that. And I think we do lose sight of that. And I think that one part of wellness is if we can reflect on the work we do and the little calls, right? Like, I talk to retirees on here, I talk to people mid-career, and usually the stories that pop out to them are like kind of the more subtle calls, right? The personal touch and that impact. Like, they saw somebody, it reminded them of a family member, and it wasn't this big hero moment, but it was just a really nice moment. And I think that we just deal with so much of the grind that we lose sight of those things, where if you harken back to when you came into the job, you'd be like, yeah, that's the stuff. That's what I want to do this for. Yes, most of us sign up. We're not expecting to be rich. We're not expecting a certain anything. But then when we come in, we get tempted, right? The toys are cool and the vacations are fun. And yes, like that can be a part of it, but you certainly don't need it all, and you certainly can't have it all. I think that you can even like relate that back to the beginning of our conversation, like trying to do it all, like that it's an illusion.
Absolutely.
All right, James. Well, I super appreciate your time. It went so fast, and maybe that's a sign that we'll have to get back together soon another time. But what would you like to leave the listeners with as far as reflections? And then please tell us where we can find you and your work, your podcast, your Instagram, and your upcoming book.
I mean, I think, again, the reflections is anything that's really pulling you in one direction. Where is your true north? Where is that center? And I think in the first responder wellness community, if your purpose is to make the world better, then I have so much admiration for you. And if you're able to find the tools that you can apply personally, then beautiful. But also don't be afraid to use the same courage you have against the bad people of the world to advocate for your family and time with your family as well. Because I think this is the big disconnection. We are extremely brave at times when we're wearing uniform, yet we seem to fold. And I get it. We're all so sleep deprived and exhausted and beat down. But we forget to have that same courage when it comes to advocating for ourselves and for our time with our family. And then that obviously pays into the strength of the family dynamics. So my takeaway really would be that you're worth it. You really are. So fight for it, and your family are worth it too. As far as where to find the podcast is called Behind the Shield. If you just Google it, it'll come up. Instagram is Behind the Shield 911. I have other platforms, but they suck. So that's the one I use mainly. And then my first book is called One More Light, Life, Death, and Humanity Through the Eyes of a Firefighter. That's a nonfiction, kind of really a collection of short stories with a story from my life or career, but then it goes into overcoming back injury, nutrition, mental health, sleep deprivation. So hopefully it's a kind of good toilet book. And then I'm just finishing up a historical fiction and the modern day character as a firefighter. That's called Kinder, and that will be out this summer.
Love it, man. Well, thank you so much. All that info will be in the show notes, and I really appreciate the time. And as always, such a rewarding experience to be able to share some space with you.
Yeah, well, thank you, mate. It was a great conversation last time. And, like myself, not only are you serving a uniform, but you're also kind of trying to be part of the solution outside as well. And I think these conversations are imperative to get people what I call educated and angry. Understand first why they should be angry, and then have the passion to actually force change in their own departments. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity today.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.